Grandpa! Willie's mother!
Free Willy 2, The Adventure Home.
How about this? What if you had, like, a spray can, see? And you spray it on dog poo, and the poo disappears.
Envy.
Won't you take me to Funky Town?
Alvin and the Chipmunks. What do all three of these films have in common? All three of those movies all played a very important part of my life and my journey to the point that I'm at today. And on this very special edition of Talking About the Movies, it's my 20th anniversary special because this coming Monday, April 14th, will be 20 years to the day that I started my very first movie review show in high school that eventually grew into the Talking About the Movie show that you know today. And as we are continuing our celebration of me covering 20 years of me covering the biggest new releases of the weekend, and since we are on the big important week in my life that really changed everything 20 years ago, I figure why not use this to tell you the story of how I got here. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the way I put the show together, and we'll talk about more important events that took place in the 20 years since then. The movies have definitely changed in the 20 years since I first started this show. I mean, we have seen a radical change from 2005 movie going to 2025 movie going, especially with this last week or so, but that's a whole nother subject altogether. But we'll delve into all that and more. Plus, we got a lot of other fun things too, so strap yourself in. We've got a fun show for you to do this week, and since we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of me beginning this, why not just start with how this whole thing began? Let's go all the way back to before the 20 years, to the time I was born. Here's my story of how I got to this point, from beginning to end. I was born into this world on January 10th, 1989, and it was a radically different time compared to what we have today. The internet was not as widespread or able to provide the capabilities that they have today, and the only thing you could do on your phone really is to just call somebody by pressing buttons on a touch-tone phone. Streaming didn't exist, high-definition television was only a concept rather than a reality, and there were only very few ways to get your entertainment value: the radio, television, VHS tapes, laserdiscs, movies, you name it. It was a simpler time, and one that I remember very fondly. As a little child, me and my sister grew up on the normal assortment of Disney movies on home video: Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, Looney Tunes, Muppet Babies, the Disney Afternoon, and Fox Kids. And eventually it would make its way over here, Cartoon Network and Kids WB, as well as classic game shows like The Price is Right, Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, Family Feud. Very early on in my life, TV played a huge part of my life. I also grew up on a fair amount of the Preview channel and pay-per-view previews, as well as TV guides to have my entertainment intellect very early in my life. I'll never forget when I got those letter magnets they used to sell, and I would just do nothing but create fake listings like something out of the Preview channel. That was something I did when I was like 5 or 6 years old. TV as a whole was my real only friend. I wasn't really much of a social person even as a little kid. Don't get me wrong, I had friends in school, and there would be the occasional play dates to places like Discovery Zone and Chuck E. Cheese for birthday parties and so, and I would still visit some of my buddies' homes as well, but most of the time it was usually just the TV and me. I didn't really go out to the movie theaters very much in my first few years on this planet, and if I did, I hardly remember it. But as far as my recollection, my first movie theater going experience that I remember for certain took place around July and August of 1995, where we used to have this big movie theater complex around Monroeville called Showcase Cinemas. My memory banks still have fond memories of the 9 years when that theater was around, for the time I went for the first time to the time it closed down. You'd walk in the middle of this big building where you'd have 2 little ticket booths on each side, unlike what we see at most movie theaters nowadays. There weren't places behind glass or a big open air area on one corner or the other. It was just 2 ticket booths that were about a little bit bigger than the size of a desk that you'd see the teacher at school, or at a late night talk show host desk. You get your ticket, and behind the counters would be open areas where you would see the big movie standees on each side, and a couple of arcade games. Posters would hang from the ceiling. And for me, back then, it was just an unusual, unique experience for me to see. The concession stands directly in the middle of the lobby in a circle, and once you got your food, it's time to head into the theater with 12 screens split up into 3 4-theater areas, one to the left, one to the right, and one in the middle. If you went into the one in the middle, there would be a lowering ramp where the floor would dip a little bit before you enter into those theaters. And on the two sides, you'd walk down these long hallways, and there would be like an additional smaller concession stand in the middle of each area. Again, something that you don't usually get anymore. It's usually set up in one main area nowadays, but back then, you didn't have to keep going all the way out to the middle to get your snacks again. You could just take a little brief run to one of the smaller stands to get refills or additional snacks. And then it was time to get inside the theater room, and this was before most movie theaters were full in on stadium seating. You'd walk in, and the seats were all on ground level, and depending on which theater number you went into, sometimes it would be big auditoriums, other times it would be small auditoriums. Those are just fond memories that I just remember so much. And the movie I went to was, of course, Free Willy 2, The Adventure Home, which is, of course, the sequel to Free Willy. And at the time, I had seen the original through videotape, and my 5-6-year-old self remembers liking the original movie mostly because I didn't really have anything else really to compare it to because my mindset wasn't fully in place at the time. So we get to the movie, we leave, and at the time, my younger self was thinking, I guess I liked the movie, and I remember coming out of it happy, but then again, it's my 6-year-old self thinking that. My range of emotions wasn't fully there yet, so at the time, I pretty much liked almost anything, but it wasn't until later on as time went on that I realized that, yeah, I didn't like that movie much at all, and that was my real first negative movie experience that I ever had as a young kid, and slowly but surely, I began to really digest into what I really like and what I really do not like when it not only comes to movies, but just in things in general. Showcase Cinemas wasn't the only theater I used to go to as a kid. There were other theaters around the area we'd check out. There was a smaller theater called the Carmack Monroeville 4 that was right across from Monroeville Mall that we would go to sometimes for sneak previews. I still remember when we went to see a sneak preview of Speed 2 Cruise Control before it came out there, and it was there for most of the 1990s before they closed it down and eventually became the Best Buy that you see in my movie stop videos. There was also another theater in Penn Hills we used to frequent, which was kind of our theater where the older movies would be at after a few months. You know, those dollar Super Saver theaters where movies from like 2 or 3 months ago would start showing up there. It was one of those theaters for a good chunk of the time. Toy Story, Hercules, George of the Jungle, Batman and Robin. We'd see these movies there, but later on, once we got into the 2000s, it would eventually start bringing in the more recent and current films of the time. We used to see films at the drive-in where we still had them, you know, the Greater Pittsburgh Drive-In. My family and I used to take a couple trips out there. I remember we saw Babe and Casper as part of a double feature. And there was a lot of movie memories that I remember back then. And again, it all started with that one trip to see Free Willy over the summer of 1995. Over the coming decade, my movie and TV intellect would only get more and more advanced as I grew older and older. And I knew at one point, when I had to think of what I wanted to do when I wanted to become an adult, I knew it had to be something to do with entertainment. But what? Well, that was something I still needed to figure out. So it's now the 2000s. The world is changing, the internet is becoming more prevalent and important to our way of life, and yet, while everything was changing in the world and my personal life, some things don't really change. My love for entertainment kept growing and growing as the decade went on, and slowly but surely I was beginning to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. A new movie theater was just opening a few minutes from my home, a big Carmack cinema theater with stadium seating and easy access to check out the newest releases. And it gave me more opportunities to see said films because the theater was much closer to my home compared to other theaters. 2004 was a big year in my life for a number of reasons. On the one hand, it was my first time ever seeing the TV series The Critic in full for the first time, which became an influential piece of my life. I had actually seen the first episode of The Critic when Comedy Central reran the show along with other adult animated shows in the 90s, and I just didn't really have the time to check the show out in full. It wasn't until January of 2004 when the entire series was released onto DVD, and it finally gave me a chance to see the show in full. And realized once I finally saw the entire series, that really motivated me to pick what I wanted to do the most in my life. The show made me realize that I could one day get paid to watch movies and give my opinion on them. At that point, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. Almost immediately, I began putting together my thoughts on specific movies that I had seen and created little reviews in my notebooks and saving movie newspaper ads and so on and so forth. 2004 was also the year that for the first time ever, I was able to go see a movie on my own in a theater. And really, it happened by accident. Me and my older sister had gone to see Mean Girls on that day in late April 2004. And then after we went to see the movie, my parents gave me the opportunity to see a movie on my own afterward with the movie Envy. That was, of course, the Ben Stiller, Jack Black comedy with Barry Levinson directing it about Jack Black creating a can of spray that makes pet poop disappear, and nobody knows how it works or where the stuff goes. It was the first movie I saw in a theater by myself.
I would love to see you try to turn your weaselly little mouth into a fake smile. Day after day after day. While you have to wave toodly fucking do to your best friend who's rearing up on a big white horse like he's the Lone Ranger. Then I'd like to take a peek at your performance chart, you beady-eyed little shrimp-boat bastard!
Me, my sister, and my dad would still see movies together, such as Shrek 2, Dodgeball, White Chicks, and Anchorman, but once August came around, I was pretty much seeing multiple movies on a day on my own every Sunday for what would be the next 9 years. And while The Critic was a major inspiration point for me, but another inspiration point was not so far away, as I just started to tune into Eben and Roper more frequently over the course of the summer of 2004. The Roger Ebert and Richard Roper-led movie review show had been a staple on the ABC affiliate in Pittsburgh, WTAE, for a long, long time, and it was only at that point that I started to check out the show in full and get a sense of what it's like to be a film critic, look at the mannerisms, see how they review the films, the type of wording that they would use, and eventually imply into what I would want to do for the future. And it became a staple for me every Saturday and Sunday night in my home from that point on. That would always be the first people I would go to see what movies I should see and should not see. With all these creative juices inside of me just waiting to come out, I knew that I needed an outlet to get this train going. And lucky for me, it wouldn't be too much longer for me to be given said opportunity. In the spring of 2005, I was only in my second year of senior high school, and I was a student working in the media classes. They would give us a chance to work on the school's morning news program, and each week it would be a different job. One week you'd be working as an anchor, another week you'd be a cameraman, another week you'd be working on the teleprompter, and so on and so forth. You'd be working on various jobs with the goal to show you how to work on a television show no matter what your job is. So April 2005 comes around, and everybody in the media class got a chance to work on separate projects and segments to do for the morning news, and that's where I saw my opportunity to finally use what I had learned and put it into the spotlight. With that, the FR Weekend Entertainment Planner was born, the FR meeting the Franklin Regional High School I went to. While I don't do straightforward reviews at that point, the whole purpose of that segment was to show off what new movies and other entertainment was coming out that weekend. If I remember correctly, the first one I ever did was the big new release that weekend was the Amityville Horror. And if that was the big new release that weekend, clearly that was not going to be a good weekend overall. And unfortunately, most of the weeks didn't get better after that, as films that came out clearly over the next few weeks were The Interpreter, because, clearly people between the ages of 14 and 18 were interested in seeing an adult thriller from Sidney Pollack and starring Nicole Kidman and Sean Penn. A Lot Like Love, Chick Flick, and King's Ransom, which was not that big of a hit critically or financially, and again, didn't really appeal to the age bracket of the show at the time. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Triple X State of the Union, films that has very specific demographics aimed at them, and most of them were not the age group that I was in. Not to say that probably people wouldn't go see these movies later on, but not at that time period. And this was also around the time that Family Guy was coming back on Fox after 3 years off the air. So there was these shows that I did that were kind of like tributes with clips that could be shown in school without dealing with, copyrights and censorship issues to celebrate the show's return. In total, there was at least 7 episodes of the FR Weekend Entertainment Planner that I did, which went all the way up to Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith, and in the middle of May. And then that was it for that point. And essentially, the FR Weekend Entertainment Planner is by the time I got back to school in the fall of 2005. I knew I needed to establish the show's identity better. So when August 2005 came around, I knew that now was the time to create an identity with the program, and so the FR Weekend Entertainment Planner became Talking About the Movies. I formatted the show to be similar to what Eben and Ropert's show would be like, talking about the biggest new movies of the previous week, creating a rating system in the Panther Pause, as the Panthers are the mascot of Franklin Regional, and taking time at the end to promote a new home video DVD release at the end. Granted, I only had about 5 to 10 minutes per episode, so to condense that all down proved to be very tricky at the start. My goal was always to get an episode out weekly, but even then, that was easier said than done. There'd be weeks where I wouldn't be able to get episodes out every time, even though I would still be going to these movies. I did make sure to see as many of the big new releases as possible, but there would be breaks in the regular rotation, and episodes that I had filmed never made it to air, mostly due to the fact that the morning news program running over time. I would still get credit in terms of my grades, but the only flaw was that those shows never made it to air. And if we're being honest, most of them have unfortunately not. Most of them have never. I did not save the ones that I never made it to air. I did save the ones that did go to air, but my big final project for the year was testing green screen capabilities. We're talking about the movie, where, with the help of one of my friends, we placed myself inside of such movies as The Matrix and Die Hard, which was going to be more of that too. There was going to be like Lethal Weapon and Back to the Future, but because of scheduling issues, we never really got around to filming those parts. So by the end of the 05-06 year, I had established my craft, and when I returned for my senior year, I had to make sure the show went on a high note. The third and final season of Talking About the Movies began pretty much where I left off, focusing mostly on movie reviews, and also adding a Simpsons clip of the week for the latest new episodes, which in all honesty was not necessary, but I felt back then I had to do it mostly to fill up time, pretty much. The focus, though, was still on the movie reviews, and even though I even tested out having guests coming in to review movies, and my goal was to do one every once in a while, but I was only able to do it one time because of scheduling issues. At the same time, I was also working on a little side project around that same time, including a Batman vs. Superman movie made entirely of action figures, which me and my friend were supposed to do voices for, but we never got to do it because of the scheduling conflicts. But I ended up using the music and the soundtrack from Superman Returns, seeing as how the Superman movie, that was a Superman movie that had just come out at the time, as the main source for sound. I did like other side projects too, like a movie version of the game Lime Rider, which was basically just me recording said game with a camera on the computer screen. There was another video I did where I tried to do video game reviews, like my PlayStation 2, playing like Sonic the Hedgehog and The Simpsons Hit and Run. There was a Celebrity Jeopardy parody that I did with friends of mine. Just all these random projects because I knew that my time was coming to an end in high school, and I didn't really have the proper camera equipment to do this kind of stuff at home now, compared to now, but. As the 06-07 school year was coming to a close, I knew I was getting ready to graduate from high school. I knew that my time on the review show was coming to an end, and I knew that for the time being, my movie review days were temporarily coming to a close. The last episode of Talking About the Movies became my final project for the year, and as you would expect, it was a very emotional day filming the last bits for the show. On June 8, 2007, I graduated from high school, and from that point on, it was off to community college. My hope was that once I got to community college, I could continue my journey to becoming a film reviewer and growing my craft. What would follow in the next 2 years, though, almost drained me physically and mentally. As I was getting ready for community college, there were some signs beginning to show that this was not going to be easy for me to continue when the day came. I went to go pick my classes, and the person that figured out my classes for me asked me what did I want to do in my life, and I said I wanted to be a film reviewer, and I was basically told none of the classes would be best suited for that, not even any type of writing classes, so I was kind of stuck for what I wanted to do at that point. And thus my community college run began, and I will say this was one of the toughest periods of my life to deal with because it seemed like no matter how hard I was trying to keep up with the pace and all this, community college just kicked me right in the ass. I was like, no matter how hard I tried, I was barely making the grade. Though most of these classes, and just barely passing. They were much more trickier and harder for me than I initially believed, and it put a lot of stress on me on a number of levels. It was putting a lot of stress on me on my end, and on top of that, there were a lot of family issues coming into play here. Family members ended up getting into hospitals, and, just with that and more stress on there. Over that 3 years I was in community college, I was really in a lot of distress. And while the last year was probably the, quote, easiest, unquote, of the 3 years I was there, it really did take a lot out of me. The world of entertainment did still manage to keep me entertained, and keep me in somewhat of a good mood at that point, even with all the struggles I went through at that point. But then in January of 2008, something happened. I came across a website by the name of Spill.com. Spill was a website that featured both videos and audio reviews for movies as well as podcasts. The group from Austin, Texas was led by Corey Coleman, Martin Thomas, C. Robert Cargill, and Chris Cox, along with co-host 3000 and Edie, and at that point, they had begun the process of putting podcasts together, such as a couple of cold ones in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. As I was going through those struggles in community college, those reviews kept me in a form of positivity during the rough times. And that first half of 2008 went on. As it continued on, I found that this website was giving me more and more interest in getting me back to putting more movie reviews out there again. And all of a sudden, my creative juices were coming back into play here, and I was also making friends with not only the Spill crew, but their fans as well, of which I'm still friends with them, to a good majority of them, to this very day. Even with Spill helping me get through the rough times, the fall of 2008 was the roughest point of my college run. I was dealing with a math class that was hard, and it was much harder than it had any right to be, and not because I wasn't getting the wrong answers. There would be times where even when I would get the right answers to the questions, they would still mark it wrong because I didn't show my work on how I got those answers the right way, and it pissed me off to no end. I had tutors help me, and yet that was still not enough. I later found out that said teacher was not well received by students for the exact same reasons I mentioned, so I'm glad to find out that I wasn't the only one dealing with this. Eventually, things got better physically and mentally when it came to community college, and a lot of it had to do with the help of Spill getting me back on the right track and eventually giving me more confidence to get back into putting new reviews again. By the end of 2009, I felt more comfortable again. I was cooler and more collective, and I got essentially my second win when it comes to film reviewing, and it really did feel like the clouds had lifted and I was enjoying life again. Over the course of the next 2 years, I was not only getting comfortable putting out movie reviews again, but I was beginning to put the pieces together for something much, much bigger. 2011 saw my creative juices starting to take shape more and more, as not only was I able to revive the Talking About the Movies brand, but I was also opening the doors to other weekly posts as well. So time had gone on. Over the next couple of years, I was slowly but surely starting to build something very, very special. And this growth would continue all the way into 2013, and by the start of the summer, I was tossing around an idea in my head that setting a goal that within 1 year I would create and have my own website to put up my own content. But little did I know that the gears were slowly but surely starting to take shape to making that idea more of a reality much faster than I could have possibly imagined. In June of 2013, I started looking more and more into the idea of creating my own website by first creating a logo and then deciding on a name. I initially decided to call the site the Review Network, but in my research, I eventually found that the name had already been taken. So I added the ing to the Reviewing Network, and the concept of the site began to take shape. On July 1st, 2013, the Reviewing Network's launch date was officially announced as a site within Spill.com, which would begin 2 months later on September the 1st. In addition to the 4 posts that were already up, I would add in other concepts such as the latest entertainment news, a live watch on Facebook, a weekly preview post, a weekly Simpsons review post, a collection of DC reviews for December, and many other things. By November 2013, traction was gaining. My plan was to make a new website of its own, was slowly but surely starting to get going, and then December 5th, 2013 happened. Spill.com, the website that had been the gear that got my creative flow going again, was being shut down, leaving not only the Spill crew to find new ventures, but leaving us, the fans, to archive as much of our work as we can go from there. What that also meant was that I had to get the solo site going faster than expected. I was scrambling to find an outlet to get the site together, but luckily on Facebook, one of my buddies of mine suggested using WordPress to get the site going. I tested it out, and right away I was hooked. I liked the ability to add features and create a website fairly quickly, and the process began to archive as much stuff as I can and get it onto my own site quickly. The next 2 weeks were spent gathering as much of my work as I could in about a couple of days' time. I was able to back up everything I had and was able to get everything set up for a launch on the official website on Christmas Day. On December 25th, 2013, the Reviewing Network website officially launched with a good assortment of my older opinions already up, and in addition, new posts came out immediately. In only 6 days in 2013, the site put up just a little under 1,000 views, and I only knew that it was going to get bigger and bigger as a full year of operation was about to commence. So a couple of years have gone by, and now it's 2016, and needless to say, 2015 was definitely a mixed bag year, to say the least. The popularity of the site was still very much there, but it met with viewership overall dropping, and I came to the realization that if this website was going to find ways to continue to be successful in the future, something had to be added into the mix. Enter YouTube into the picture. Now, I'd had my YouTube channel pretty much since near the beginning, maybe about a year or two after YouTube had launched. It was around 2007. I was usually watching on there just to watch videos. Never really had a plan to make a channel or to produce content or make series. And keep in mind, this was just around the time where my creative slump largely began because of the stress of community college and other personal matters. So my creative juices were not really meant to be taken seriously. So 2010 was kind of the starting point of that, where I started to do like little videos, but nothing too big or spectacular, and most of the effort that I was putting in creatively went through either Spill or the website. 2016 was the real testing point for me to see if I could venture into something more of a video format, and one of those tests came with a series of test videos of me filming my normal routine of going up to the mall on Saturdays, and that would eventually lead to other videos getting made, including, my trips out to Steel City Con, and just these other videos in general. Not like a scripted series territory as of yet, but it did give me a little bit of a motivation for the plan going forward. In addition to the website, as well as the extension of the YouTube channel, the viewership actually rose up on both of them, with 48,706 views coming in to the site, and additionally nearly 10,000 viewers to the site as well. And having YouTube in there helped add into the equation overall. And like I said, it was just the beginning of what was to come from there. So time went on, and things were actually starting to look up. The website was getting good traction. And I was also getting a lot more people coming to the YouTube channel, mostly because of clips that I've been put up there. But for me, 2022 was really the pushing point for me to boost the YouTube channel. And my goal was to boost more original content to the channel, which included more video reviews and another series to complement the Movie Stop series that have been going on since 2016. So, in February, an idea kind of hit me to do a movie review show chronicling the movies from the day I was born to today, and thus Time About the Movies was born. And since then, we've done over 1,000 episodes, and we've done these specials and all that. That's been part of the main success of the show's success overall. But most notably, one major series launch of that is in that year of 2022, besides Time About the Movies, was the long overdue series version of Talking About the Movies. You know, this was a weekly post that I've been doing on the website all the time, and one day I just got the idea of, you know, why not try to bring this back into a series format? I'd always wanted to try to find a way to go back to my original movie review show days, but I never could find the real right time to do it. And so by July of 2022, I didn't know why I was so uninvested in my usual new movie reviews. I got a little bit of a writer's block having to come up with a full-length review, and it was starting to bum me out a little bit, but I couldn't stop doing them because those were the big featured posts that I had on the website. And so that same month, I decided to test out the concept of taking the post I had made and putting it into a video series, taking 2 short video reviews I did for League of Super Pets and Note from an episode of Movie Stop I did, and putting them together into one review. And right from the start, I knew that this was a move I had to do. The Talking About the Movies reviews going into video form really gave me new life, as it allowed me to do more stream of consciousness conversations talking about the things I wanted to talk about with a specific movie, and it gave me a feeling of returning to my old roots, how this whole thing got started with the old high school show, and to this date it has still been going strong. 2022 saw a shift in me adding more content to the YouTube channel while also adding to the regular site itself and showing a lot of promise ahead for the 10-year anniversary of the site to come the following year.
So that's my story of how we got to this point, and how in 36 years on this planet, this is where I've eventually ended up at. But where do we go to next? So some of you may be wondering, what's my process for reviewing movies? Like I've done videos before where I've shown how I put together a Talking About the Movies episode as a whole. You know, what do I do? What seats do I go at? But if you want a full understanding of how my process for reviewing movies works, here's that right here.
Most critics and film reviewers have a process for reviewing movies, and this is how my personal process basically goes. Usually it starts on Tuesday when I check the theater listings for my local theater, because that's when the full listings eventually get posted up, and I'll usually end up picking up my tickets and times for the shows not too shortly afterwards. I've already mentioned that the first 5 years I went to the movies, it was a mix of Showcase Cinemas, for Theater Carmike, as well as Cinematropolis. And after that, for the longest time, it was the much bigger Carmike Cinema Theater that opened in 2000. There was one about 10 minutes away from where I live, and that was where I used to go to for 13 years, with the occasional visit to a Distinta Theater or a Lowe's Theater. And then when I eventually found out we were getting a Cinemark Theater at the Monroeville Mall, I started occasionally visiting the Cinemark Theater out of Robinson, outside of Pittsburgh, to get a good taste of what was to come. Since 2013, Cinemark's been my main theater to see movies at, and it's made my day more convenient, as I could do my shopping and see a movie on the same day. Ordinarily, I'll usually get my tickets online, and occasionally I'll get my snacks online too, so it makes it easy for me to get to my tickets and the snacks without having to wait in a long line. So I can just get right to the movie theater as soon as I walk in. I usually go on a Saturday morning and afternoon because it's usually the best time of the day. It's never too crowded. It's never too packed. The audience are at minimal at best, with the occasional crowd once in a while with a highly anticipated movie like, I don't know, an Avengers movie or a Spider-Man movie. And the theater will usually be filled, but never too much where it can get distracting or packed, and it would be later on in the day. In terms of seating, I usually like to sit at the very top of the theater, either on the far left or the far right, where there's a seat right there with easy access to the stairs. It's comfortable, it's nicely placed where I can see all of the screen without feeling like I'm too close or too far away, and it's easy for me to get up to go to the bathroom or get a refill or something, but there's also that nice little perch next to my seat where I can put something extra if I don't have any room, like easy area where I can find there are no obstacles or people in front of it. It's my favorite area to sit in a movie theater. In terms of if I do anything special, like, you know, how Gene Siskel back in the day used to use a notepad with him back in the early days to take down notes while watching a movie, I don't usually do that. There was a period of time around 2004 when I was starting to go on my own where I did keep a little notepad of which movies had specific trailers on them so I can be prepared for which one I was about to see. But but that was something I only did for a little bit. Once the film is done, I usually collect my overall thoughts and do like a little short for YouTube with my first impressions coming out of the film, gathering about a minute's worth of thoughts, and then going on about my day doing other things, while also continuing to think about what I want to remember for the review when it comes to talking about a specific movie. Sunday afternoons is usually when it comes together. It's time to put a review together. And what I did with the original reviews is that I would start the same method like how Siskel and Ebert used to do it, rating movies on a specific scale of 5 stars, and then using that as the basis for the forthcoming review at hand. Now that I've switched over to the YouTube channel, my method changes are a bit different now. Like, I don't have the star system, but I've switched over to the thumbs up, mixed opinion, thumbs down type of reviews that Gene and Roger and Richard Roper used to do. And the reviews have become more stream of consciousness, like I've been talking to my friends, collecting my thoughts and things I want to bring up, and then giving a final rating. The process of putting together a review can usually take about an hour at the very least. In terms of the video reviews, I'll usually film my review first, but then add in the trailer clip to tell the viewer what film I'm looking at, and finally record the voiceover at the beginning of each episode. And I'll usually go into my bathroom, lock the door, and do my voice in there. It's cheap, it's very effective though. It works for the video for when it's all said and done.
So in essential, that's kind of my process for reviewing movies in general. It's the process I've used ever since I started doing this whole thing, mostly going online and all that type of stuff, but that's really how that essentially has transpired over the years. But what about the movies as a whole? What has changed in the 20 years since I first started this show to where we're at now? I mean, there's obviously a lot of things we could talk about here, but I'll try to summarize it as much as I can here, so enjoy this.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
In the summer of 2005, the expectations were high for the third and final installment of George Lucas's prequel trilogy to the Star Wars movies, Revenge of the Sith. Even though Attack of the Clones and The Phantom Menace had not reached the same popularity that I think that George Lucas was hoping for with his original Star Wars trilogy, Revenge of the Sith was still the highest-grossing movie that came out in the summer of 2005, and served as a satisfying conclusion to a series that had been very disjointed. It was definitely the most well-received of the 3 movies, even though that movie still had a lot of notable flaws to it. But the summer of 2005 was also a notable year in terms of starting one of the biggest trends of recent memory, and that is rebooting and reviving a franchise. And none of that was bigger than the case of Batman Begins, directed by Christopher Nolan.
He's here. Who? The Batman.
You gotta remember that back then, Batman Begins' expectations for most people were moderate to low, mostly because of what had happened with Batman and Robin, and the fact that they had tried to make so many Batman movies in the past that just couldn't get past the greenlighting process. So to have a movie like this, featuring a relatively unknown at the time in Christian Bale, but stacking him up with a pretty known supporting cast, including Michael Caine, Liam Neeson, Katie Holmes, Morgan Freeman, Tom Wilkinson, and a relatively newish director in Christopher Nolan, who hadn't really done a whole lot of notable things. I mean, his biggest movie at that point was Insomnia, and most few people had seen stuff like Memento and Following, which were his 3 films he made before this. And even the movie didn't open up to the strongest start overall. The film only made about $48 million, and for a movie that had a $150 million budget back then, people thought that this movie was going to come and go. Like, it was not going to make any money, it was going to be seen as kind of a flop overall, especially considering the competition that was ahead of it, such as Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds, starring Tom Cruise. It'd be very different if it was a film directed by Tom Cruise. But no, Tom Cruise was the star of it. Steven Spielberg was the director of it. And in addition, you had other movies like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Wedding Crashers waiting around the corner. But Batman Begins really had a lot of legs. It stuck around in the box office. The reviews were absolutely fantastic. And the word of mouth kept playing for the film. And the film eventually went on to become a massive commercial success and went on to become the second highest grossing Batman film at the time of its release, only behind the Tim Burton Batman movie of 1989. And the trend was still the norm for the most part going into 2006 and 2007, but then by 2008, there was a little bit of a changeover, and one studio in particular wanted to get their name in the spotlight and did it in a way that was very unprecedented for the time, but the end result paid off pretty well for them.
Mr. Stark, you've been called the Da Vinci of our time. What do you say to that?
Absolutely ridiculous. I don't paint.
What do you say to your other nickname, the Merchant of Death?
That's not bad. They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire. I prefer the weapon you only need to fire once. That's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well so far.
That movie, of course, being Marvel Studios' Iron Man. Now, Marvel had a struggle at the box office for several years. They had times when they had good box office overall with the Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies, but when it came to stuff like Blade, it started off strong, but then the sequels didn't do as well as they should have. They tried other movies adaptations like The Punisher, and then Electro and Daredevil and Ghost Rider, which all didn't pan out very well. So Iron Man was seen as a huge gamble, especially when you consider that Marvel Studios funded the project themselves. This was their first attempt to put together their own self-financed film in general, with only Paramount Pictures distributing the film. And again, kind of like with Batman Begins, there really wasn't a whole lot of big notable stars in terms of the director and the writers and the stars as a whole. Like Jon Favreau was a recognizable name, but he had not been a big financial draw, and especially Robert Downey Jr. Even though Robert Downey Jr.'s name had been known for years, he wasn't seen as a reliable box office draw at that point, mostly because of his problems behind the scenes, his problems in the in the 90s and 2000s. But his career was slowly but surely starting to make a comeback with stuff like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, The Singing Detective. But Iron Man just seemed like the perfect movie for him to get back on track. And kind of like with the Batman Begins formula, they put him behind a lot of notable names in the supporting cast. Terrence Howard, Jeff Bridges, Gwyneth Paltrow. It all just came together so well, just like Batman Begins did. Iron Man was not only a massive success, but it really changed the game for the superhero movie genre in general, mostly because of the plan that Marvel had set up with this new identity of theirs. Of course, the end of the movie has Samuel L. Jackson showing up as Nick Fury, telling Tony Stark, "I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative." And that was much more than I think a lot of people were really ready to believe in, because it would be the beginning, of course, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a thing that had never been attempted before, and it was going to be really tough for Marvel to try to do this on their own. But slowly but surely, they paid it off in a big way. The Marvel Cinematic Universe eventually grew, and once they started getting more and more of their properties back, it eventually led into a very successful endeavor. And with the help of Disney acquiring Marvel in 2009, it eventually paved the way for this to become very profitable for not only Marvel, but also Disney as well. And since then, we've had several successful Iron Man movies. The Incredible Hulk has been very successful. Thor, the Avengers movies have lived up to all the hype. Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, the Spider-Man movies eventually made their way back there. Black Panther, Ant-Man, just so many movies. And it all began with this one idea in Iron Man that was seen as a gigantic gamble. And it paid off big time. It paid off big time for Disney and Marvel. And for the most part, it still remains somewhat successful today. Certainly not as much as as it was before COVID, but you can tell that they're starting to try to figure out how to get back to where they were before COVID in general. But Iron Man was part of a big year for Robert Downey Jr., who would eventually become a major box office draw from that point going forward. But the biggest new release of the year was still a few months away, and it was another game-changing movie from the same people that made the last big game-changing movie.
Evening, Commissioner. Why so serious?
Just like how Batman Begins set the tone for superhero movies going forward in 2005, The Dark Knight elevated that to a whole nother level completely. They brought a lot of the same people back from the previous movie. Christian Bale was slowly but surely beginning to build his name in general, and more importantly, it was there was an impressive visual viral campaign that initially focused on the criticism of the casting of Heath Ledger as the Joker. Just like how Michael Keaton was criticized for playing Batman in 1989, Heath Ledger was criticized for playing the Joker as a whole. But then when he died of a prescription drug overdose that January, that negativity went away, and so all of a sudden there was a lot of hype behind Ledger's performance as the Joker. Everyone thought that this movie was going to be, that Ledger was going to be incredible in this movie, to the point where he would receive Academy Award nominations. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, and The Dark Knight essentially became the blueprint for many modern superhero movies, particularly for its rejection of a typical comic book movie style in favor of a crime thriller. And it's a much more gritty, realistic tone, and it just set the tone for where superhero movies were going to go from here. The Dark Knight is still one of the best achievements in the last 20 years of filmmaking as a whole. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it was a film that really just took it really just became a massive success overall, and nobody really expected it to do even better than the original film did. But Christopher Nolan was really proving that he was the dominant force to come in the decade to come. If there was one filmmaker who has really dominated in the 20 years I started reviewing movies, it's Christopher Nolan. I mean, he's a guy that he knows exactly what he's doing. He has these incredible visual ideas that are very complex, but they're also very entertaining. Inception would prove that 2 years later, going on to become a massive success and actually leading to the first time Christopher Nolan's movies had ever been nominated for the big major awards. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, and be the first of many, many films directed by Christopher Nolan that will receive the Academy Award nominations, including Dunkirk. Interstellar was also nominated, and also the movie that he would eventually win the Oscar for, Oppenheimer, which came out in 2023. During this time, we also saw the end of the Harry Potter series, which had only begun 4 years prior to me starting the show, and essentially was a big game changer in terms of how to bring these young adult books to life on the big screen. The Harry Potter movies did it the smart way, starting them off as kids' movies, but then eventually evolving into more adult and more intense movies, ending up with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows becoming the most successful film in the series in general, and putting a nice little conclusion to the Harry Potter storyline in general. As, of course, until Warner Brothers and J.K. Rowling decided to continue to destroy whatever good reputation the Harry Potter movies had with the Fantastic Beasts series, but that's a whole other subject altogether. As the new decade of the 2010s began, we started to see more focusing being put on event pictures. The 3D trend was starting to make a comeback, and it began mostly with, of all things, the Miley Cyrus Hannah Montana movie, and also U2. But the big thing was that James Cameron was getting ready to put out a new movie is made exclusively for the digital 3D, IMAX 3D audience, Avatar, which was a film that was being well hyped for a number of different reasons. One, it was the first film to be shot completely with digital 3D, but it was also James Cameron's first major theatrical release since Titanic in 1997. And so there was a lot of hype being built up for this movie, and there's a lot of things that, this movie really had to live up to a lot of high expectations in terms of the way the film looked, especially considering that James Cameron was promising groundbreaking new digital technology to make this movie a movie-going experience unlike any other. And sort of like just how Titanic kind of started off slow but then continued to do well over the course of time, Avatar did that same thing. It didn't start off with the strongest business overall. I mean, it made $72 million and it had a budget of $237 million, which was going to be tough for anybody to make into a success in general. But Avatar was one of those films that, just like Titanic, it stuck around in the box office. It was the number one movie, I think, for almost 10 weeks, I think it was. It was around in the box office for several weeks, and it did eventually go on to beat Titanic as the highest-grossing movie of all time at that point, and essentially opened the door for 3D movies in general to become the new norm. Let's just say that it didn't go as successfully as they probably would have hoped it would have. Not to say there wasn't great-looking movies as a whole. Alice in Wonderland, the Tim Burton movie, was actually the first big 3D release after Avatar to take advantage of this new format. And then a couple weeks later, we had How to Train Your Dragon, which still looks incredible, no matter what if you're watching it in 3D or 2D. But then you had movies that tried to do post-conversion 3D. And you could start to see where the problems come to play because post-conversion 3D ends up not looking so great. Case in the point of Clash of the Titans, which, was a big hit. It actually did much better than most people expected, but nobody was really going back to that movie thinking that the 3D was amazing. In fact, most people were saying that the 3D was pretty bad on that movie, but other films that would have success with that format, Shrek Forever After, Toy Story 3, Despicable Me, Inception was also released in 3D as well. Jackass 3D had a movie come out around that time that used the 3D format. Basically, at the time, it was being used for mostly blockbusters, animated movies, and just gimmicks in general. That did work out as a whole, but slowly but surely, people started to realize that you can't just put 3D to every single movie out there. You can't do the same thing that you did with Clash of the Titans or The Last Airbender, because nobody's going to go see those movies. Is because they don't look, because the 3D doesn't look all that good.
I volunteer as tribute.
So we now go to 2012, and 2012 definitely was a time where, there was a lot of hope and excitement for the box office. We were getting a new Batman movie in 2012, directed by Christopher Nolan. The long-awaited Avengers was coming out, but in early spring, there was a movie that a lot of people did not see coming that actually turned out to be a much bigger success. In fact, a couple of movies in particular. Phil Lord and Chris Miller made their mark with 21 Jump Street becoming an unexpected critical and financial success, but the following week, all the attention was on The Hunger Games, which of course was based off of the Suzanne Collins novels, and also had the benefit of a growing young star in Jennifer Lawrence, who would later go on to win an Academy Award that same year for starring in The Silver Linings Playbook for Best Actress. But The Hunger Games really was that film that really kind of took everyone by surprise. It was not only a successful film for the fans, but critics and audiences in general, who weren't even fans of the books in general, really took to the film. And it did become a massive hit for Lionsgate. It made over close to $700 million worldwide at the box office, and eventually led into a series of its own, a franchise of its own. And also prompted many studios to start realizing that, these young adult movies make a ton of money. We need to go ahead and take every single one of these and see if we can do the same thing with The Hunger Games. And 9 times out of 10, it didn't usually work out in their favor. A couple months later, The Avengers came out.
Gentlemen,
What are you prepared to do?
No offense, but I don't play well with others.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that away. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Finally, the build-up after nearly 5 years of building this series up in general and building up to this moment finally paid off, because the film was not only a massive success, but it also broke box office records almost out of the get-go. It actually became the 3rd highest-grossing film at the time of its release, and the highest-grossing film of 2012, and also became the first movie in box office history to gross over $200 million at the worldwide box. It's at the opening domestic box office, which had been unheard of at the time. I mean, it was a massive, massive hit that really not a whole lot of people saw coming. And that $1.5 billion it made worldwide really made Disney's investment idea, bringing the Marvel into its foray, probably one of the smartest moves ever that they had ever done as a studio, by bringing that in there and essentially making Marvel their equivalent to Warner Brothers DC. Paid off big time in the end. The Dark Knight Rises did well too, but then again, it also had the unfortunate circumstances of opening on the same weekend and having an effect of the infamous Aurora, Colorado shooting, which kind of pushed people away from the box office in general. But nevertheless, Dark Knight Rises still did very well. Not as successful as The Dark Knight was, but still made over $1 billion at the box office, and just proved that the box office was more than capable of handling some big blockbusters in general. This was also a time when new franchises were coming out. Ted was a massive hit. They rebranded the Spider-Man franchise. Twilight was coming to a close, and Peter Jackson was returning to the Lord of the Rings with the Hobbit series. New James Bond movie was coming out at the time. So the box office was swinging in 2012, and that would continue into the years to come. 2015 was also setting up to be a massive year for the box office in general, with film adaptations of 50 Shades of Grey, Kenneth Branagh's version of Cinderella for Disney, a new SpongeBob movie, and also big sequels such as the sequel to The Avengers, Age of Ultron, Furious 7, the Fast and Furious movies, Pitch Perfect 2, but Minions, Ant-Man, Mission Impossible, a ton of big blockbusters coming out around that time, including the conclusion of the Hunger Games movies. But one blockbuster in particular really kind of surprised everybody at how successful it was, and that was, of course, Jurassic World. Now, it had been about 14 years since the last Jurassic Park movie, so nobody really knew if the demand was still there for a Jurassic Park movie, even though they were packing in some pretty big stars at the time. Chris Pratt had his name grow bigger with the success of Guardians of the Galaxy the year before, as well as the Lego Movie, Bryce Dallas Howard, Vincent D'Onofrio, directed by a relative unknown in Colin Trevorrow, and then the film went on to become a massive critical success, calling it the best Jurassic Park sequel by most critics, and it surpassed the Avengers for the highest-grossing opening weekend of all time, grossing $208 million at the box office domestically, and then going on to make over $650 million, and thus Universal, and it was actually Universal's highest-grossing film they had released at that point, and I think it still technically is. And it basically just proved that that dinosaurs were still very popular, and the Jurassic Park franchise was still very popular as well. But no blockbuster was bigger that year compared to what we got at the end of the decade, at the end of the year in 2015.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
In 2012, Disney had acquired Lucasfilm, which meant that everyone was wondering if that means a new Star Wars series was going to get made, as this was going to be the first, and it would be the first one without George Lucas at the helm. And sure enough, that's exactly what they got when Star Wars The Force Awakens came out on December 18th, 2015, with J.J. Abrams, after his success with Star Trek, becoming the director on this movie, and the combination of J.J. Abrams, the hype building up for what a new Star Wars franchise, especially one under Disney, could really be like, really brought a lot of people to the box office as a whole. And sure enough, that budget of $533 million, near $500 million they spent on this movie, it paid off big time, because this film was a massive success, grossing $2 billion at the box office, breaking various box office records, and eventually becoming the highest grossing movie of all time at the box office. It was a massive hit, and also helped to rejuvenate the Star Wars franchise as a whole, creating a new trilogy, which unfortunately has not ended up being as successful as The Force Awakens did, but despite what people say, I still think those movies are still much better than the prequels. But in fact, Star Wars as a whole, I think, has gotten better under Disney. I still believe that, but you can't deny that Star Wars The Force Awakens was the ultimate definition of an event picture that lived up to the hype, and eventually did lead to Star Wars eventually returning to the form that it once had back in the day. In all honesty, Disney was dominating the decade of the 2010s as a whole, so much so that every other studio tried to copy their success. And one of the bigger ones was Warner Brothers, trying to copy the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with DC, but their biggest problem early on was that they were going to do it in half the time that the Marvel Cinematic Universe did their movies. And when you do that, you get some really bad movies out of it. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, Justice League, trying to put all these movies together and trying to get these movies out there as quickly as you can. Yeah, it just doesn't work out in their favor. But there was one real success out of the movies that they did during that time period, during that first few years, and that was Wonder Woman, which actually ended up becoming a massive success at the box office and became the biggest film that they had at that point. They would get some other movies here and there. Aquaman would be successful, as well as Shazam. But then, after the pandemic happened, the DC cinematic universe that they were setting up, unfortunately, kind of fell apart pretty quickly. And now it's being rejuvenated under James Gunn, who coincidentally worked at Marvel, and is looking like he's going to have a hit on his hands with Superman coming up this summer. But as I said, things were going great for Disney, especially at the end of the decade in 2019. They had a ton of hit movies that grossed billions of dollars at the box office. They were the top-grossing studio for many, many years, especially 2019 was their biggest year with Captain Marvel, Avengers Endgame, Aladdin, Toy Story 4, The Lion King, even movies that they weren't associated with, Spider-Man Far From Home, which is technically a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, so that means Disney has some rights to the money there, but they were still successful regardless. Frozen 2 was a big success. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, everything was looking pretty good for the box office in general. And then the world closed down in 2020. The box office fell apart as everybody else in the world kind of fell apart, because really nobody really knew where we were going to go from there with the COVID pandemic. It took the box office a long time to get going again. The summer of 2021 was supposed to be the rejuvenation point, the beginning of the return to the regular format, and needless to say, it didn't get off to the strongest start as a whole. I mean, movies like Tom and Jerry and The Marksman, The Little Things, The Croods: A New Age, Raya and the Last Dragon were not big successes overall. But as the summer came around and the summer went on, we did eventually get slowly but surely a sort of return to form of the box office, with A Quiet Place Part 2 and F9, The Fast Saga, as well as Black Widow doing decent numbers, as well as Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And then as the year continued on, that we started to get more and more movies that were doing successful, like Encanto, Ghostbusters Afterlife, Spider-Man No Way Home was the biggest of the successes. 2020 started to begin the return of where the box office of getting the box office back on track, with an Uncharted movie coming out, a new Batman reboot with Robert Pattinson starring in it, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Top Gun Maverick, Jurassic World, Minions, Thor. I mean, all these big blockbusters, Black Panther, Avatar. We were finally getting the Avatar sequel after so many years of waiting for it. And that's kind of where the box office stands right now, where Hollywood's mindset is. The plan right now for Hollywood seems to be just like, keep it up with the event pictures. The event pictures are really where we need to go with this, because that's what's going to draw the butts into seats. And sure enough, as I'm recording this is the last week, we had a Minecraft movie, no matter how you feel about the movie, it was seen as an event picture. And it's definitely an event picture that's bringing people into the theaters, maybe not for the best ways possible, but that's a whole nother story altogether. But needless to say, the box office as a whole has definitely changed, and the way Hollywood has been thinking their strategies as a whole has definitely changed in the 20 years since I started reviewing movies. So in that 20 years, who has really been the breakouts that have really have gone from being relatively unknowns at that point to where they are now? I mean, obviously some big ones right off the bat. Christopher Nolan, who I think really has become the premier director of his time period. I mean, he's really amassed these amazing movies that just, every time he makes a new movie, he puts the butts in the seats, because everyone knows he's not going to put out a bad movie in general. Like, every movie he puts out is some form of good. Even his lesser movies like Interstellar and The Prestige are still really good movies overall, but, they just have a little bit of notable flaws to them. But, we've had directors like Phil Lord and Chris Miller who have really amassed into really solid directors. Sean Baker has been a really solid director. We've had new stars in the Daniels as of late. Who else? Joss Whedon and J.J. Abrams, what they were able to bring to the Avengers and Star Wars and Star Trek as directors. They're moving from television to filmmaking, and how they've changed their format since then. Like, there's a lot of great writers and directors out there, a lot of great young talent out there. In terms of actors who have really grown over the last 20 years, I don't think anybody's had the bigger success that Robert Downey Jr. has had. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. went from being a relatively an actor who was kind of seen as washed up and seemed like he was on his way out the door, especially with his legal troubles. But in the 20 years since then, he's gone from being somebody who was almost out of the picture to becoming one of the biggest box office draws out there. Like, you put him in a movie and it's instant gold at the box office, no matter what it is. And the guy is just a great actor overall. It's just like anything that guy touches is instant gold. Like, that's somebody that has really grown into somebody who has really become the biggest star in the 20 years since I've been doing since I've been doing movie reviews. You've had a lot of big names that have risen in the past as well. Mahershala Ali, Jennifer Lawrence, Shamik Moore, Haley Atwell, Haley Steinfeld, Michael B. Jordan's another big name. Half the people from West Side Story, the remake of West Side Story, Rachel Zegler, Mike Faist, Ariana DeBose, Glenn Powell, Sydney Sweeney. I mean, there's a lot of good young talent and a lot of people who are going to eventually become bigger and bigger names as more than they are now. And I personally just can't wait to see where the future goes with these people in general. That's a whole nother subject altogether, though. But, so really, I think I pretty much covered everything that I wanted to cover for this. I mean, what are my final thoughts on this whole thing? Like, what do I take away from 20 years of doing this? And really, like, it's more of just what I've been loving doing all my entire life, honestly.
I really just started doing this with the idea that, hey, I love watching movies, I love watching television, and if I could do that for a living and get paid and eventually get paid for it, I would love to do that. And unfortunately, I don't get paid to do this stuff. I still have a normal 9-to-5 job. I still do my job that I've been at for the last 20 years. But, I mean, watching movies and watching television really does more for me than I think a lot of people would let on. I mean, it's just watching these movies and shows really just kind of take my troubles away from the world, even though there was a lot of problems in the world right now, and there was back then too. But just stepping away from a few hours to just let somebody entertain me like that, it's just like, it's one of the greatest feelings in the world. And to get the chance to tell people what I think of movies in general, the movies that they should be seeing and the movies that they should not be seeing, it's just something that I've loved doing ever since. I mean, this is something that I've been loving to do ever since I was a little kid, and it's just something that has never been not fun to do in my entire life. It's always been an adventure. It's always been fun to do. Yeah, there's been some times when I've had to sit through some really bad movies and TV shows, and just so much so that there's been times when I want to pull my hair out or just want to go ahead and slam my head against the wall because of how much I hate this experience. But it never takes away from my true enjoyment of this job and what I've been able to do the last 20 years, and hopefully something I'll be continuing to do till the day I die. I mean, I've been told my entire life that I would never be able to get this far. Like, this is something that I would not be able to do for a living. But the fact that I've had to come through this, despite all the obstacles and challenges I've had to face in my life, I feel more than eternally grateful for everything, despite everything I had to go through. It's been a fun time doing this. It's been a fun time doing the site. And it's been a fun time just having everything in this working out in my favor overall. I never ever thought in my lifetime that I'd be sitting here right now talking about how my love of movies has gotten me to the point that I'm at today, and I can still have that be a part of my daily life every single day. I've learned to be very grateful for the opportunities that I've been given, and that also it takes a lot of time and patience to get what you really want. Even after you reach that point, you still need to wait to see where the road takes you, and there's no telling right now where my path is going right now. My path could end almost immediately. Like, it could end by the time I'm done with this, but I'm hoping that's not the case at all. But what's important, and I kind of specified this in the book that I wrote, is that you got to keep going. You have to never let any obstacles or challenges, as rough as they are, get you from doing what you love doing. And that's my overall goal in life every day. The road never really ends. As the old saying goes, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. It's about where the road will take you and the things you will have to do to get to that goal. I've had the privilege of doing this for 20 years now, and my plan is to not leave anytime soon. Thank you folks out there for making this a part of my life and really been enjoying these videos and everything I've been doing. You guys have really been the reason I'm still standing here right now, because really, I don't know where I would be at if I didn't have this outlet to do this with. It's something that I take very much for granted. And, I try to not be a selfish person. I try not to be a person that just thinks of myself overall, but I mean, it's just great knowing that there's people out there that like what I've been doing, and they've been enjoying it for the past 20 years, and hopefully I'll continue to do this until the day I die, plain and simple. But so thank you folks out there for making the last 20 years very special. Here's to 20 more years. I wish I had a glass of wine to show my appreciation, but this Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar will do the trick for you. So here's to 20 years, and here's to the next 20. Amen. Okay, so with all that said, thank you very much for joining me on this very special 20th anniversary of talking about the movies, and it's been a true honor to be with you here for this moment. And the celebration is definitely not over yet. We still got a whole year to go of me looking back on 20 years on some fond movie memories. But before we get into any of that, we have newer releases to take a look at. And next week's big new release is none other than Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan's latest film, Sinners. So I will definitely have a review for that coming up on the show next week. So I hope you will be there for that. But until then, thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see what I had to say about last week's new release of Minecraft movie, please go ahead and check out the video in the corner. Check out the playlist as well. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button. And thank you for joining me on this special edition of Talking About the Movies. Here's to 20 years and 20 more to come, and many, many more to come too. So with all that said, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, take care.